At the time of Order 66 and Operation Nightfall, the Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi was located on Utapau, but even as he was being shot down by his 212th Battalion, this was just the beginning of his nightmares. After escaping death at the hands of his clones, Obi-Wan piloted the starfighter of General Grievous, and using the emergency code 913, he would eventually find the safety of Bail Organa. It was on the Tantive 4 did Obi-Wan finally believe that Anakin was among the betrayed Jedi, but the truth was considerably worse. Deciding to take the risk of returning to Coruscant and recalibrate the beacon at the Jedi Temple, Yoda and Obi-Wan battled the 501st Legion, and once they were defeated, they examined the bodies of the Jedi to find the wounds inflicted by lightsabers. When Obi-Wan told Yoda that he would find out who had caused the massacre, Yoda responded that the Jedi Master already knew. Nevertheless, once Obi-Wan recalibrated the beacon and warned all Jedi to stay away, he ignored Yoda's warning, and believing that he deserved the pain, he would enter a code into the holoscanner. Obi-Wan would see a variety of footage, from the massacre of younglings in Cin Drallig in the Room of 1,000 Fountains, to the kneeling of Darth Vader, and finally his allegiance to the Sith. Obi-Wan struggled to comprehend what had happened to Anakin, and he desperately asked Yoda to send him to face Palpatine, and the Grandmaster refused. But what if Obi-Wan never watched the security recordings? Would the Jedi still enter into exile? Obi-Wan knelt down to examine the body of a fallen Padawan, and when he turned it onto his side, he saw burns that only a lightsaber could create. As he asked Yoda who could have committed such an atrocity, the distinct curve on the burns was all too familiar, and it started to sink in that Anakin had done this. Moving to the holocom center, Obi-Wan refocused his mind to recalibrate the beacon, but such was his emotional distress, he crushed a holoprojector, earning a scolding from Yoda. The Grandmaster ordered for Obi-Wan to go and find his fallen apprentice, and now he regretted not seeing the footage, as it might have given him a clue of Anakin's location. His first instinct was to go to Padme's apartment, considering Anakin's not-so-subtle efforts to hide his marriage, but it was the destruction of the holoprojector that gave him another idea. Whilst most of the temple had been destroyed, the war room remained largely intact, and using a different Jedi code, he tries to reach out to the former Padawan Ahsoka Tano. The Padawan had just survived betrayal by a 332nd Company, and she was surprised that both Obi-Wan and Yoda had also survived, but the knowledge that Anakin had turned to the dark side overwhelmed any light. With the escape of Maul, Ahsoka had little insight into Anakin's location, but she thought that if the Jedi could get to Palpatine's office, they could access the holoprojector in his private suite. Obi-Wan advised Ahsoka to return to Coruscant, not for the Jedi, but for Padme, whom Obi-Wan knew was in the latter stages of pregnancy. Having just witnessed the deaths of dozens of clone troopers, Rex wanted to stay undercover and save the lives of other clone brothers, but he allowed Ahsoka to pilot the Y-Wing to a safe rendezvous point, where Bail Organa had arranged transport onto the planet. By the time Ahsoka had made it to Coruscant, Yoda's normally unflappable patience was growing thin, as he knew Palpatine was swiftly securing his control, and the fallen Anakin would be on the move. He knew this, as in the time waiting for Ahsoka, Yoda bravely left the confines of the quiet temple, and with the clone troopers and especially the Coruscant Guard all monitoring the surface of the planet, he had to be careful. With his cloak over his head, the Grandmaster moved like a shadow, and ascending to the summit of the Republic Executive Building, the window had yet to be repaired. The Emperor had not thought that there would be survivors, so there were only 2 stationed Coruscant guards, and Yoda comfortably force-pushed them into the wall and accessed the Emperor's old recordings. Watching the footage that Obi-Wan refused to believe even existed, Yoda now knew more about the clones and the weapon turned against them, but also about Anakin's mission to Mustafar. When the clones started to awaken, Yoda quietly returned to Bail Organa's Cantham house, and once Ahsoka arrived, they set about trying to save the galaxy. As the former Padawan was tasked with protecting Padme and the potential children, Obi-Wan was dispatched to Mustafar to see if he could find his wayward apprentice, and Yoda searched for Palpatine. As the Grandmaster watched Obi-Wan leaving Grievous's starfighter, Yoda was about to travel to the Senate chamber when a booming voice echoes across the city. The Vice Chair and now Grand Vizier Mas Amedda was declaring the fall of the Jedi Order, and he started to personally incinerate lightsabers. As Yoda watched this unfold on a large holoscreen, he considered that the Jedi were too late, but he had to repair his own mistakes caused by the hubris of his order. The Grandmaster silently returned to the crumbling Jedi temple, and when he saw more lightsabers being burned, he saw both Palpatine and his new apprentice. His first instinct told him that Obi-Wan should turn back from Mustafar, but the Jedi needed to know more about Palpatine's plans, considering the depth of his manipulations. Yoda regrettably could not do anything about the Sith for now, but the more positive news was that Ahsoka guided Padme to Bail Organa's ship in time, and she gave birth to Luke and Leia whilst remaining alive. The fact that children were strong Force sensitives was not a surprise, but with the claws of the Empire on the remaining Jedi, the exhausted Padme is taken to Alderaan with her children. The Senate had wanted to see Anakin again and fight the Empire, but the Jedi and Bail Organa take matters out of her hands, and once Obi-Wan arrived on Mustafar, he discovered the remains of the Separatists strewn across the war room. The Jedi Master forced himself to watch the previous transmissions, and though not as traumatic as he presumed the footage of the temple to be, he suffered when he heard Anakin following Palpatine's orders. When Yoda confirmed from Coruscant that Anakin had returned to the planet, Obi-Wan decided to investigate Mustafar for more signs of the Emperor's activity. With some of the native Mustafarians examining the war room, Obi-Wan took the starfighter across the Obsidian mountain ranges, and he found an abandoned mining facility that echoed with its dark side energy. When Obi-Wan landed beside it, he now could sense pain and suffering, so after defeating the droid guards, he found a number of Jedi younglings and even younger babies, and this reminded him of Cad Bane's kidnappings in the Clone War. The Jedi Master sent the encrypted data from the secret base back to Rex, and with the help of R2-D2, whom had left Anakin after his fall, the astromech discovered activity going back more than 30 years. Beginning with ownership by the Damask Holdings, visitors included the likes of Darth Maul, the Black Sun, and most importantly, Darth Sidious. Though being a Sith Lord was not a crime, his role in the kidnapping of children and using funds attached to the intergalactic banking clan was one of many pieces of evidence the Jedi needed against the Emperor. But even with the discovery of the facility, Obi-Wan still felt darkness in his surroundings, and returning to the site of Anakin's Separatist massacre, he saw a cave buried beneath the volcanic surface. As he approached the cave, he saw a group of architects examining the carvings on the inside and the area around it, so he assumed that the Sith were hoping to make this planet one of their strongholds. Whilst the Jedi made his return to Coruscant, Bail Organa was busy building further incriminating evidence against Palpatine. With the help of Yoda, Organa gathered senators who were part of the delegation of 2000, who had made some moves to remove Palpatine's emergency powers. The likes of Senator Chuchi and Fang Zar all presented suggestions on Palpatine's devious activity, mainly consisting of treason. This included talking to the likes of Chancellor Valorum, who was overthrown by Palpatine before the Clone War, and has recent suspicions on the intentions of Naboo's blockade. Even though Padme was recovering on Alderaan, she still managed to utilise her connections to the world of Scipio to obtain a record of the IGBC's transactions before they were arrested near the end of the Clone War. Organa established links between the war and the transactions, but to have definitive evidence, they decided to travel to Dooku's home planet. Whilst the Jedi were preparing for a counterattack, Palpatine and Vader were in the Emperor's office and in a ferocious duel. Vader had not relented in his pursuit of Padme Amidala, who he believed was going to die in childbirth, but the Emperor continued to deflect the questions until now. His lightning attack coursed through the body of Vader and told him to forget about Padme, as this was a weakness for the Sith and would inhibit his rapidly increasing power. But truthfully, Palpatine was concerned. If the Senate had survived the chaos of the end of the war, her offspring would surely be powerful in the Force, and should they fall into Jedi hands, his place could be under threat. As his apprentice was too closely connected to the mission, he delegated his most loyal clone troopers, who were soon to be replaced, to find the missing senator dead or alive. Yoda and Obi-Wan, on the other hand, had managed to make it to Serenno, but already there was Imperial activity on the planet. Nevertheless, these Jedi Masters had not survived Order 66 by luck, and docked by the jungle behind Dooku's castle. The two Jedi scaled the cliffs supporting the castle, and as Imperial cargo ships zoomed overhead, they used their lightsabers to cut through the back of the castle. Above the cells and dungeons, the Jedi gained unrestricted access to Dooku's archives, and transferred more incriminating evidence against Palpatine back to Senator Organa. But as they are about to leave, they hear the footsteps of Imperial clone troopers outside, and they realise they must have triggered the alarms. Activating the turbo lift behind Dooku's console, the Jedi made their escape and are now a step closer to saving their order. When Yoda and Obi-Wan return to the Tantive 4, they both look shocked at some of the transmissions between Dooku and Sidious, and they were both ashamed that the Jedi didn't make a greater effort to raid the castle. But now was not the time to dwell on the Jedi's blind following of the Senate's requests, as they had just seen evidence of the speed of the Empire's takeover. This was compounded by Bail Organa's latest visit to the Senate chamber, as Palpatine had just announced that those in the delegation of 2000 would be rounded up for their treason against the Empire, and their hiding place was under threat. Obi-Wan and Yoda proposed to use them as bait to draw out one of Vader or Palpatine from Coruscant, and though it pained Obi-Wan to admit it, he knew Vader would be eager to spring the trap, and he would also want to prove himself to his new master. With the loyalties of Rex lost in the chaos of Order 66, the Jedi wanted to utilise this lack of knowledge whilst it lasted, and despite his reservations, he decided to accept the Jedi's dangerous mission. Making yet another journey back to Coruscant, Rex tracks the movements of Palpatine's guards, and he finds a small squad of TK troopers, who always followed Palpatine's royal guards. These were merely seen as a test of the replacement clone troopers, but for Rex, it offered him a chance to get information to the Emperor and his apprentice. When the TK troopers were performing a routine march, Rex took advantage of one of the troopers lagging behind and quickly snapped his neck and dragged him behind a pillar. Rex was now disguised as a TK trooper, and for the second part of his plan, he started to pass on rumours to the other troopers that the senators of the delegation of 2000 were rumoured to be hiding outside of Coruscant, and he also left a datapad at the Old Republic military base, which was now the Imperial Inspectorate headquarters. With his infiltration complete, Rex monitored the communications from the post opposite the base, and very quickly he deliberately planted false information and it started to spread across the entire army. In under a day, Commander Fox had received the false news, and from the shadows behind the base, Rex saw him reporting the news to his old general, and the former clone couldn't believe what he was seeing. An aura of darkness surrounded the fallen Skywalker, and his voice was laced with a coldness that was devoid of emotion or compassion. Rex almost collapsed to his knees in shock, but he managed to hear that Vader was going to report this to the Emperor, and with his hands quivering, he found a spare comlink from his cache of supplies. With the comlink in hand, Rex knew that Vader would sense any dramatic movements, so he waited until Commander Fox was isolated and discreetly placed the comlink onto the back of his armour with an adhesive. As Rex tracked the movements of Fox, the old clone commander finally reached the Emperor's throne room, where Rex could hear Palpatine and Vader discussing these rumours, and as the Jedi had anticipated, they were eager to spring the trap. Just as Rex was about to return to the ship, he heard the comlink fall from Fox's armour and tumble to the ground. Rex winced as he heard the cold voice of Palpatine, and whilst Vader began to choke the poor clone, Palpatine began to interrogate him for treachery, but not finding any lies, the Sith ordered his apprentice to leave him and track down the miscreant. This was the cue for Rex to leave, and as Palpatine's guards and troopers left the perimeter of the Imperial Palace, Rex moved to his designated departure point and returned to Bail Organa's ship with his newly acquired knowledge. With the Jedi anticipating the Sith, they had thought they could use an Old Republic outpost as a lure, but the discovery of the comlink would alter their plans. Knowing Vader was still after Padme Amidala, they switched the outpost to a bait, where Rex had covered the base with explosives, and they opted to move their bait to the skies over Naboo. The Jedi gather whatever forces they can access, which mostly consisted of Old Republic weaponry and starfighters, and without any pilots, Rex helped to design a flight program which they could follow. But the Empire was wise to such a threat, and with considerably more resources, they were able to deploy a number of battalions to scan every world, which was either in the Empire's jurisdiction or marked as potential resistance. Bail Organa's small but increasing network of spies had discovered this widespread Imperial activity, but the Empire's ruthless new army was starting to counter Organa's work, and the information began to dry out. The increasingly desperate situation soon reached its apex, as a transmission from Ahsoka and Padme on Alderaan revealed the presence of a Star Destroyer over their planet. This bad news was compounded by the presence of a Star Destroyer over Naboo, and the two planets that the Jedi wanted to use were now conveniently blockaded. It seemed Palpatine was a step ahead of the Jedi once again. The Jedi were faced with a dilemma on how to use their resources, but knowing Vader's Jedi past had connections to Naboo, Yoda decides Obi-Wan and Ahsoka had to face their fears, whilst the Grandmaster protected Padme's children on Alderaan. After Vader had attacked Palpatine, the Sith Lord decided that he would try and eliminate Padme Amidala, whom had been a continuous thorn in his side. But despite the best efforts of his army, Amidala continued to elude him, and he opted for the next best option, which was to fake her death, and this would at least squash the false hopes of his apprentice. With the help of Captain Panaka, the Emperor organised a fake burial for Amidala, even constructing a mausoleum around a sarcophagus. When Ahsoka and Obi-Wan approached the planet, they were confronted by some of the remnants of Palpatine's orders, but also a new wave led by a Star Destroyer. The two Force users were supported by more of Rex's automated starfighters, even going as far as creating a body double for a Jedi, but they were a distraction for their escape pods. Having found the hull of their Star Destroyer in an abandoned shipyard, the interior was fairly hollow, but the disguise was sufficient to deceive the Imperial commander. Combined with the starfighters, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan utilised two escape pods, and with their rudimentary steering and propulsion, they descended into the heart of Naboo. The soft paddings on the walls of the escape pods enabled the two Jedi to survive the landing, and as they burst their hatches open, they were surprised to be met by a group of Gungans. Though Jar Jar Binks had helped to consolidate relations between the Gungans and the Naboo, they thought Otto Gunga and its surroundings were abandoned, but it seemed that the Gungan Grand Army was spread out over various worlds. Obi-Wan used his famous negotiation skills, and claiming to be friends of Padme Amidala, a Gungan guide takes the guests from the swamp, and with promises of helping to fight the Empire, they began their journey to Theed. As they approached the outskirts of the jungle, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka felt a great coldness around them, and beneath the entrance of the tomb, constructed on the orders of Palpatine, stood the figure of Vader. At the sight of Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, the Sith apprentice choked his former friends, and as the unfortunate Gungan guide met his demise, Obi-Wan managed to tell Vader that Padme was still alive. Releasing his grip and dropping his two coughing victims to the floor, he ripped open the tomb and found several Sung guards. The hate towards Obi-Wan for hiding Padme from his existence was very quickly replaced by hate towards Sidious for lying about Padme, and after he decapitated the guards, he was met by the empty orifice of Padme's tomb. The Sith stormed out of the mausoleum, and ignoring the stunned Jedi, he ordered for his ship to be prepared and left the world of Naboo. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka had no idea what had just happened, but once Queen Apellana arrived from the royal palace, she explained that she had already put tracking devices on Vader's ship. It was not a surprise that Vader was going back to kill his master, and thanks to the Queen, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka could extend the range of their communications, and discover Yoda was trying to prevent the Emperor from landing on the planet. The journey to the core world was excruciatingly slow, but from the tracking devices, they are not far from Vader. Once they exit hyperspace, they find two Imperial Star Destroyers fighting each other above Alderaan, and Obi-Wan thinks Vader has also brought his own fleet. Combined with Yoda's efforts, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka watched the crossfire from their Naboo Royal starship, loaned to them by Queen Apellana, and as they continued to track Vader, they are stopped by a sudden change in atmosphere. The normally peaceful setting of Alderaan was illuminated by lightning bolts, and if not for their use of the Force, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka would have been electrocuted. Whilst the Jedi's progress had been stopped, Vader had been travelling through the atmosphere, but now his entire ship was swarmed by electricity. It was only his hate for Sidious that prevented his pain from taking over, and when he started to see the city of Alderaan, he ejected from the canopy of his starfighter to plunge into the lagoon. Vader had no interest in swimming the considerable distance, as he could sense his master from the royal palace, and he latched onto the wings of a native avian bird known as a Thranter. Vader guided the creature to his destination, and in the shattered throne room, he leapt down and tackled his master as he was about to kill Yoda. Palpatine recovered to stand face to face with Vader, and he declared him to be a failure of the Sith, but Vader told him that his compassion gave him strength. The Emperor raised his hands and fired pure Sith lightning at Vader, and the apprentice instinctively moved to block the attack, but with his lack of dark side control, he was soon retreating. Palpatine cackled at his failure as an apprentice, and he told him that only with his power and knowledge could Vader ever be powerful enough to defeat him. Vader's eyes began to flicker from their sickly yellow to his Jedi blue, and they were soon illuminated by his lightsaber. Palpatine sneered at the colour of the blade, having told Vader to bleed a crystal, but igniting his own red blade, he welcomed the challenge. Despite the warnings of the ailing Yoda, Vader charged at the Emperor, but he was soon dismissed to one side with a flick of the wrist. As Vader got to his feet, the combatant hears screams of terror from above, and it is Obi-Wan and Ahsoka flying towards them in half of a smoking starship, forcing Palpatine to take evasive action. With Obi-Wan joining the fight, Palpatine uses a mix of the Force and his lightsaber, but it seemed like the Sith was toying with his opponents. If anything, Obi-Wan and Vader's styles were hindering their efforts, so the Jedi Master told his old Padawan to revert to his old Jedi form. The mention of the Jedi angered the Emperor, but he soon found himself crushed against a glass window as Yoda had finally got to his feet. Having received the necessary medical attention, the Grandmaster refused to fail, and Obi-Wan and Vader combined to kill the Emperor. Vader collapsed to his knees, just as he had done in Palpatine's office, as the remorse of the suffering he had inflicted hit him in waves. Even the sight of Padme and their children failed to diminish his pain, and though he agreed to reside on Naboo, he spent his time in isolation, wondering where it had all gone wrong.